Right. Let's just let that present if it wants to work for me. Okay. So today, as you can quite clearly see, and we've advertised, we're going to be sort of doing a kind of sort of Bible study, I guess, about the Messianic Prophecies. So just sort of quickly, in case you didn't know, I just thought we'd look at what are the Messianic Prophecies, because they're quite important. So they're basically, in simple terms, they're the prophecies that we find in the Old Testament, talk about the coming of the Messiah. So they cover all sorts of things: how the Messiah will be born, where he was born, but also things the Messiah will do during his lifetime, and ultimately what the Messiah will do for us. And as I said, they're found in the Old Testament. So they're all written at least 400 years before Jesus' birth. Isaiah, which is probably where we find the most famous ones, was written approximately 700 years before Jesus was born. So they're all quite old. And Jesus fulfills over 300 of the prophecies which are mentioned in the Old Testament, which is obviously quite significant because 300 is a lot. But the other thing that we find is that not all of them are fulfilled. But we also know it tells us in the New Testament that Jesus is coming back, and as Christians we believe that the second coming will fulfill these remaining prophecies. But that also obviously raises the question: if Jesus didn't fulfill all of them, how do we know who was the Messiah? And simply just because there are sometimes specific Messianic prophecies. So one of the most obvious ones of this is in Daniel 9:24-27. It talks about the Messiah will arrive before the destruction of the Second Temple. And we know from Roman records that the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD, which is approximately sort of 35-40 years after Jesus' death. And obviously 70 AD was quite a long time ago. So we know from that the Messiah must have already come, which, because Jesus has fulfilled all these, that's kind of how we know Jesus was the Messiah, which is obviously something that is still a big thing in Judaism. They don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and so they're still waiting for the Messiah. But as Christians, we believe, because of things like the destruction of the Second Temple and the fact that Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies, that Jesus was the Messiah. But obviously, because there are over 300 prophecies that Jesus fulfills, we can't really look at all of them at all, let alone just in this session. So I've kind of chosen, I think it's 9, or maybe it's 8. No, yeah, 9. About things to do with Jesus' birth and the coming of the Messiah, because it's, well, the 25th of November today, and so we're fast approaching Advent. That next session will be in Advent, and so I thought kind of it was a good time to sort of look at the kind of fulfillment of the Christmas story. So gonna kind of look at that. So the first one I thought we'd look at says that the Messiah would be born of a woman. So we find this originally mentioned in Genesis 3:15. It says, this is God speaking, "I will make you and the woman enemies of each other. Your descendants and her descendants will be enemies. One of her descendants, i.e. the Messiah, will crush your head and you will bite his heel." And so this is God talking to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And so kind of what we can see from this is, ever since sin entered the world, which we find in Genesis 3, Jesus was part of the plan. The Messiah has always been the resolution for sin. As we see from, this is, I think, the first reference there is to a Messiah, and it obviously kind of talks that the Messiah, would be born of a woman, as most of us are. But the point is that the Messiah is going to be born rather than just, appear or whatever. And we kind of find this fulfilled in the New Testament. In Matthew 1:20b, it says, "The angel said, Joseph, descendant of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the baby in her is from the Holy Spirit." And then we also see in Galatians 4:4, it says, "But when the right time came, God sent his son, who was born of a woman and lived under the law." So both of these referring to Mary, and who was Jesus' mother, and the fact that Jesus was born, he spent 9 months growing in Mary's womb, and then was born like we all are, which kind of is our first fulfillment of this prophecy, because the Messiah, or is going to be born, and Jesus was born. Second one, which is quite widely known, I think, is that we find prophecy in Micah that says that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. So it says that you, Bethlehem Ephraim, although you are too small to be among the army groups from Judah, from you will become one who will rule Israel for me. He comes from very old times, from days long ago. So again, this is a lot of these are kind of God speaking through prophets. But we're talking about Bethlehem is a very small, insignificant place. But in Micah, we hear that is where the Messiah is going to be born. And obviously, as we know, that happened in Matthew 2:1a. It says, "Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judah during the time when Herod was king." So it's quite explicit. In Luke, we kind of get a bit more information. It says, "So Joseph left Nazareth, a town in Galilee, and went to the town of Bethlehem in Judah, known as the town of David. Joseph went there because he was from the family of David," and this is kind of significant on a later point. "Joseph registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was now pregnant. While they were in Bethlehem, the time came for Mary to have the baby." So Luke talks about going back to Bethlehem because that's where Joseph's family is from for a census, and there's kind of some historical, kind of not clear historical things about what actually he refers to in the census, whether that was just a sort of thing for the Jews that Herod did, or a sort of a Roman census that we don't have record of, because obviously this was over 2,000 years ago. But what we do know of the Romans means that this kind of movement isn't to be unexpected. And whatever led to this kind of form of counting, census, whatever you want to call it, the significance here, I think, is the fact that Mary and Joseph didn't just choose that the baby was going to be born in Bethlehem and call it the Messiah. They went to Bethlehem because they had to. They didn't choose to go there. They were ordered there. And then that was when Jesus made his entry into the world. So this is one of the things where it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence or anyone tried to set it up. It's quite sort of explicit, because from Nazareth to Bethlehem is a long way. People are not going to do that just because why not? And then I feel like I'm going through these quite quick, but as I said, there's a lot, and it's kind of looking at the whole overall sort of picture. And then these two are both referred to in Isaiah. The Messiah would be born of a virgin, which is obviously very significant, and the Messiah would be called Emmanuel. So it says, "The Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be pregnant. She will have a son, and she will name him Emmanuel." Now, obviously, we know that unless God intervenes, there is no way a virgin can be pregnant, for obvious reasons. And especially in late sort of the BC to AD period. So that doesn't happen. But what we find in Luke 1:26-27 is we find about Mary. So during Elizabeth's 6th month of pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin. It was very straight off that Mary is a virgin. She was engaged to marry a man named Joseph from the family of David. Her name was Mary. Now, I talked a bit about Mary before in our summer sort of Bible study series when we looked at sort of some women in the Bible, and I did a session on Mary and about the significance of her sort of virginity and her engagement and stuff. So I'm not really going to go into that much now. If you wanted to either rewatch that or watch what I said then you can find that on YouTube. But the fact that Mary wasn't married at the time that she was engaged, but she wasn't married, she was a virgin, is obviously a massive fulfillment of the Messiah would be born of a virgin. I don't know how else to really interpret that. I think it's quite explicit. But also the Messiah would be called Emmanuel, where we find in Matthew 1 verse 22 to 23. All this happened to bring about what the Lord had said through the prophet. And we have this quote from Isaiah, and then Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Now we know that see, we refer to Jesus being called Jesus. You can kind of go, well, Jesus is not the same as Emmanuel. But for one thing, we do know is in the Bible, God has so many different names. And my interpretation of this has always been, obviously, I'm not a theologian, so don't take my word on anything. But this is referring to the fact that Jesus is God with us. It's not necessarily explicitly that he is called Emmanuel. It is who he is rather than his actual name we used to refer to him as the time, if that sort of makes sense. But they refer to him here as Emmanuel, so kind of shows that Jesus is God in an earthly form. It's the sort of, he is the God who walks with us. Quite a big thing, I think, in the Bible is you talked about sort of the lineage. It's often called the lineage of grace, which leads to Jesus, but we kind of read about this person's son and this person's son and this person's son, and that kind of goes through the Bible. And one of the biggest people that kind of all these descendants come from is Abraham. And we have in Genesis 12:3, God says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will place a curse on those who harm you, and all the people on earth will be blessed through you. So this is referring to one person who will bless everyone. And then in Genesis 22:18, through your descendants, all the nations will be blessed because you obeyed me. And so he's talking about this blessing, which we know to be the Messiah. This is obviously Genesis, this is right at the start. So very long time before Jesus is born. But what we find is Matthew 1, chapter 1, verse 1, literally the first bit of the New Testament. It says, this is the family history of Jesus Christ. He came from the family of David, and David came from the family of Abraham. I think the placement of this is quite important. It's the first thing we read in the New Testament, is that Jesus was a descendant of Abraham. Which, I mean, I think just shows how significant this is, that Jesus comes from this line that has been faithful to God, that has seen great blessings, and it's seen kind of almost the impossible. In Genesis, we read about Abraham and Sarah struggled to have children, and that Sarah was, I think, 97 when they were finally blessed with children, and that seemed impossible, because she was old, she was barren, but they saw great blessings, and so did their descendants. And so I think this kind of shows that Jesus was not only a blessing to us, but would also bring blessings to us. And then in Romans, we also read, they are the descendants of our great ancestors, and they are the earthly family into which Christ was born, who is God over all. Now, obviously, Christ is God in human form. That his father is God. but he does still have an earthly family. He did have an earthly family, and this is kind of his roots on earth, which is kind of what Romans is on about. And then in that, which we kind of looked at, is mentioned in that Matthew verse, it says the Messiah would be the heir to King David's throne. So, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up where I am in my notes. Oh yes, I was going to say with the Abraham thing, we read in Genesis as well, that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, and so we see that Jesus is also a fulfillment of the promise God makes to Abraham in Genesis. He is one of those many stars who comes to bless the world. Just his blessing is a lot more than most people, obviously. Sorry, missed that point off in my notes. Yeah, so the Messiah would be heir to King David's throne. So in 2 Samuel chapter 17 verses 12 to 14a, we read, "When you die and join your ancestors, I will make one of your sons the next king, and I will set up his kingdom. He will build a house for me, and I will let his kingdom rule always. I will be his father, and he will be my son." And then in Isaiah 9:7 says, "Power and peace will be in his kingdom, and will continue to grow forever. He will rule as king on David's throne and over David's kingdom. He will make it strong by ruling with justice and goodness from now on and forever. The Lord all-powerful will do this because of his strong love for his people." Isaiah 9:7. So what we read in David is a king, obviously, King David, sorry, that we find in the Old Testament, and he's widely seen to be the greatest of the biblical kings. There's not a lot of them. I think there's 4 or 5, but he seems to be the best of them, the one who fulfills God's plans the best and has the biggest heart for God. And Jesus is a descendant of this great king, which suggests that he's going to continue David's legacy. He's going to be powerful, and he's going to be a good king. Which David made flaws. He wasn't God, unlike Jesus. He sinned and he made mistakes, but he was still a great king. And that's kind of suggestion here is about Jesus will be a great king, and he will do a lot of good for people. And then in Luke, we read, "He will be great," which we kind of already said, "and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord Kingdom will give him the throne of David, King David, his ancestor. He will rule over the people of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will never end." And obviously, as Christians, we believe this. We believe that we are living in that kingdom, and that even when the time on earth comes to pass, we will have eternity with Christ in that kingdom. And then Romans 1:3, "The good news is about God's Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. As a man, he was born from the family of David." So at this point, the last point, we've seen quite a lot of reference to Christ's lineage. It is significant because he's kind of carrying on sort of trends set by these previous people who have seen these blessings and have been done good for God as much as human beings can do good. That he is kind of continuing that greatness, and he's going to be even greater because he is without sin. Then the next is a massacre of children would happen at the Messiah's birthplace. So in Jeremiah 31:15, this is a bit of a confusing verse initially, but it says, "This is what the Lord says. A voice was heard in Ramah of painful crying and deep sadness. Rachel crying for her children. She refused to be comforted because her children are dead." Now, Rachel was Jacob's wife. We read this in Genesis, and Jacob was Abraham's grandson. This is part of that lineage from Abraham down to Christ. But also because we said briefly, Abraham's descendants will be as numerous as stars. This is kind of interpreted to talk about the whole sort of Jewish kind of population. they're descendants of Abraham. And in Matthew chapter 2, we read, when Herod saw that the wise men had tricked him, he was furious. So he gave an order to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and in the surrounding area who were 2 years old or younger. This was in keeping with the time he learnt from the wise men. So what God had said through the prophet Jeremiah came true. This is kind of referred to as the massacre of innocence, because obviously children are quite innocent, but it's sort of the destruction of the baby Jews, and it's quite a significant thing. It talks about Rachel crying for her children. It's plural, it's lots of them, and obviously this passage in Matthew refers to a lot of babies unfortunately being killed. So it is a massacre, and so as I think as clearly as we can get, a fulfillment of this thing, a massacre of children would happen at the Messiah's birthplace. And then we also kind of read as well that the Messiah would spend a season in Egypt. In the Old Testament, in Hosea, it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and I called my son out of Egypt. I mean, in the New Testament, Joseph receives a dream in which he is warned about the massacre of innocents before it happens. So in Matthew 2, we read, so Joseph got up and left for Egypt during the night with the child and his mother. And Joseph stayed in Egypt until Herod died. We read after Herod died, an angel of the Lord spoke to Joseph in a dream while he was in Egypt. The angel said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, because the people who were trying to kill the child are now dead. So Joseph took the child and his mother and went to Israel. So we see they're warned, they left for Egypt. They lived in Egypt for a while. But then Jesus was quite literally, through his father's dream, called back to Israel from Egypt, which we kind of see reflected in that I called my son out of Egypt in this Old Testament passage. So I guess kind of what I kind of, in very basic terms, hopefully, is kind of try to draw parallels that we see between the Old Testament and the New Testament about these prophecies, that they're fulfilled, and often very explicitly said, they even reference previous prophecies, but in the one about the massacre of innocents is maybe not as obvious initially, but actually when you kind of look into it and what it's meaning, it's quite, we can see this sort of fulfillment of them, and they're quite big things. I mean, where Jesus is going to live, that was going to be born, rather, that there's going to be a massacre when he's born, that he would be born of a virgin, that he would be God with us. All of these things we kind of see fulfilled. But the kind of thing I wanted to sort of leave you with was I thought we should look at the kind of final prophecy, which is the meaning of the Messiah, that the Messiah would be a sacrifice for sin. In the Old Testament, this is quite a long passage. In Isaiah 53, 5-12, we read, but he was wounded for the wrong we did. He was crushed for the evil we did. The punishment which made us well was given to him, and we are healed because of his wounds. We all have wandered away like sheep. Each of us has gone his own way. But the Lord has put on him the punishment, for the evil we have done. He was beaten down and punished, but he didn't say a word. He was like a lamb being led to be killed. He was quiet as a sheep is quiet, without its wool being cut. He never opened his mouth. Men took him away roughly and unfairly. He died without children to continue his family. He was put to death. He was punished for the sins of my people. He was buried with wicked men, and he died with the rich. He had done nothing wrong, and he had never lied. But it was the Lord who decided to crush him and make him suffer. The Lord made his life a penalty offering, but he will still see his descendant and live a long life. He will complete the things the Lord wants him to do. After his soul suffers many things, he will see life and be satisfied. My good servant will make many people right with God, will carry away their sins. For this reason, I will make him a great man among people, and he will share in all things with those who are strong. He willingly gave his life and was treated like a criminal, but he carried away the sins of many people and asked forgiveness for those who sinned. In the New Testament, we read, when we were unable to help ourselves at the moment of our need, Christ died for us. Although we were living against God, very few people will die to save the life of someone else, although perhaps for a good person, someone might possibly die. But God shows his great love for us in this way. Christ died for us while we were still sinners, and we find that in Romans 5. I guess what I kind of wanted to leave us on was that we're heading into Advent, we're heading into Christmas. I think everyone's kind of looking forward to Christmas after the year we've had. But Christmas is the start of kind of Easter, I guess. That this is the coming of the Messiah, and that is, so great in many ways. It's the fulfillment of these prophecies we've looked at, the 8 before this. But the coming of the Messiah isn't significant if the Messiah doesn't die for us. And Jesus did. He sacrificed himself for our sin so that we might be saved. And I think that's something that is another reason to bring us joy on for Advent, that Christ's our sin died with Christ. And that is what Christ came for, that we celebrate on Christmas. He came to die for us. And I think we should, I don't think we should separate Christmas from Easter. See, date-wise, they are separated, but Christmas is the start of that promise that God made to his people, that he would send someone to save us. And that's sort of that he would be a sacrifice for our sin is, I think, the most significant prophecy. And we know this was fulfilled because, there are accounts not just in the Bible. There are accounts by Roman historians, people who were the enemies of Christ and wrote about the death of Christ. We know he died for us. That's fact. And so I kind of just wanted to leave us with that at the end of this, that this is the fulfillment of that prophecy as well. Now, talking about Advent, a little bit happier note, because obviously it is a happy note because Christ died for us, but it's also quite a thoughtful one. So we're heading into Advent, so I thought we'll come when we've got some plans for Advent. But first of all, I thought I'd just sort of share 2 sets. I need to add sound to my share. Share the video kind of talks about Advent, which we are heading into, and just a little bit of reflection if my computer wants to load. that hopefully gave you a little bit more about Advent, which starts next week. And just to kind of let you know, we are doing some pretty exciting things for Advent. So we teamed up with Barton and Simmons to use. And so between the three of us, we're doing a devotional series, which will be released at 6 p.m. on Instagram every day from the 1st to the 17th of December, looking at the Christmas story and sort of various significance. We will be looking at some prophecies I've mentioned in sort of passages in Isaiah and Micah, etc., as well as looking at passages in the Gospels. And then on the 18th of December at 7:30 p.m., we're doing a sort of event. It has to be on Zoom this year because of COVID. There'll be more details about that, but it'll be a kind of celebration of the end of term and looking at the kind of the end of this devotional series. So the last part of that series will be in that Zoom. So we hope you can join us for that. And there will be more details on that. So make sure you're following one or all of our Instagrams, both for the devotional series, but also for more details about that Zoom. So get excited about that. And start getting excited about Advent, because it is the fulfillment of these prophecies. It is people waited for the Messiah for thousands of years. So it's a pretty big thing. So let's get excited about it. We all need it this year. And sort of get ready for Christmas. Thank you.